The powers that be keep telling us that we have a climate emergency. I don't believe them. I think that's an absolute load of nonsense because carbon dioxide is not a harmful gas like they would try to make us afraid of. Anyway, to discuss this and climate reality, we have a regular guest to today's news talk on the show with me today, and this is Roger Tattersall. Roger, welcome to the show.
Good morning, David, and thanks for inviting me here today.
It's really good to have you on the show. And you came to the Heritage Party conference last year. You gave a great speech there about climate alarmism. I have so much good feedback from what you said there. But you're an expert. I mean, you look into this and you write articles about this, and you look into the science of this in a way that is very deep and very very thoughtful. And one of the things that we keep getting told is that we might have blackouts coming next year and so on, and which I don't think are necessary at all. But we've actually dismantled some of our carbon-based fuel and energy infrastructure. And
That's right.
how is this going to affect us and energy costs and what might happen if we get a bad winter?
Well, it's not good news, is it? I mean, David Cameron sold off a lot of the generator sets from the old closed down coal-fired power stations and to Germany, which was building some new coal-fired power stations.
No.
And this is a problem because the lead time on big generator sets like that, they're only made in the Far East, and the waiting list is several years long for those kind of big generator sets. So, this energy policy is something that needs to be thought about well in advance. And it seems that our government is simply, reacting to pressure from the green lobby all the time and doesn't have a very coherent policy. And when you're relying more and more on wind turbines, for instance, I mean, in America last year, they installed an extra new 6 gigawatts of capability, which is about the same amount as we get from our Canadian forest burning centre up in the north of England at Drax, 6 gigawatts of electrical energy was installed in America last year, and yet the amount of energy that they got from wind power went down, and that's simply because it wasn't as windy last year.
Right.
So when you're relying on Mother Nature, she's quite unpredictable, really, and these kind of intermittent forms of energy generation are okay in small amounts or a local level, or maybe for off-grid use and so on, small canal boats and so on with a little wind generator on top to keep the batteries charged up. Great, but when you're trying to run an industrial economy and a health system and keep houses warm for people in winter in the northern latitudes, relying on these unpredictable forms of energy is really foolish, and that's why we're in danger of blackouts, because there isn't enough spinning reserve anymore. You need the inertia of big flywheels going round, so that if you do get a power outage, you've got the stored energy to restart the grid again. And we're very short of that kind of spinning reserve energy as our nuclear reactors are going offline pretty soon, that were built, back from between the 60s and the 80s. They're reaching the end of their life. They're not being replaced at anything like the rate that they should be. We've got, 2 nuclear power stations being built, but very, very slowly. And one of them to a design which has never worked anywhere in the world.
No.
They've been building this thing in France for 15 years and still haven't got it working. So, this is not good. And of course, the scarcer something is, the more expensive it gets, and people are being hit in their energy bills and by the green levies added to those energy bills to subsidise the wind farms, which get a very high price paid for what little and unpredictable electricity they actually produce. So this is a bad situation all round, and I urge people to take measures to protect themselves in the case of possible blackouts. Have some other form of illumination on hand apart from mains electric illumination. Either have some batteries and some LED lighting that you can run off batteries, or in the extreme, you could use a couple of hurricane lanterns, couldn't you? And they'll help keep your room a little bit warmer as well, burning a bit of kerosene or paraffin. But always be careful with naked flames out there.
Yeah, indeed. Well, are we also importing a lot of energy and gas as well? I mean, from Norway and places like that to make up the shortfall now.
Indeed, and also liquid natural gas from places up the Gulf like Qatar, and given the political instability and the actions of the Houthis firing at ships in the Gulf and the Red Sea, in the Red Sea, it's highly dangerous to be relying so much on imports, especially when we have hundreds of years worth of coal under the North Sea. And you can use coal not just for electricity generation, but you can also heat it up without the presence of oxygen, generate something called syngas from it, and then using a chemical process called the Fischer-Tropsch process, you can actually create oil. It's synthetic oil. And you can use that to run vehicles, your transport system. And in fact, the cost of that is now down to about somewhere in the region of $120 a barrel. So, at the moment, oil is, I think, in the mid-80s dollars a barrel. So it isn't all that far to go before that sort of thing becomes commercially viable. And I think it would certainly be wise for the UK to have the capability to produce its own synthetic oil in the case that political instability elsewhere in the world, leaves us with a shortage of imports. But people just, the government just doesn't think this far ahead, unfortunately.
No, it seems completely crazy that we could be self-sufficient in energy, and you see that $120 a barrel. I mean, surely that's cheaper than the equivalent price of getting the same amount of energy from wind turbines and solar panels.
Absolutely. I mean, we're paying huge amounts of money for wind-generated energy, all on the back of this greenhouse theory, global warming theory. Call it what you will, which has such deep problems and is now contradicted by the data which the scientists themselves have gathered, but are now kind of in denial of, because it doesn't fit the agenda of the people who pay their salaries and give them money to do research. And so since 2000, we've been measuring the amount of radiation coming into and leaving the Earth's climate system, and with a satellite carrying an instrument called the Ceres, which is about radiation, solar radiation coming in, long wave radiation going out from the Earth's system, and what we see from that data is that far from extra carbon dioxide trapping heat in the atmosphere, which is the story that we've been told for the last 50 years or so, more energy is leaving the Earth now than it was in 2000, and the reason for that is that CO2 has nothing to do with the Earth's surface temperature. What has caused the warming in recent years is a reduction in the amount of cloud, and this is evident from the Ceres data, showing that there's less solar shortwave radiation being reflected back out into space off the top of clouds than there used to be, and more of it's getting down to the Earth's surface and warming predominantly the oceans, which cover 7/10 of the planet's surface. So the whole idea of cutting emissions to change the surface temperature of the planet is ridiculous, because the data now contradicts that anyway, and yet we carry on down this path because the politicians don't like doing U-turns because it makes them look stupid. Scientists don't like admitting that they've been getting things wrong for decades, and so it seems that nothing will shift the dial, until the public gets righteously angry about power cuts and the cost of their energy bills. So we'll wait and see how long that takes to happen.
Yeah, but it also seems the people who are pushing this, the right at the very top, the people like, John Kerry and Obama and, maybe Harry and Meghan, they all weigh in on this and how we need to save the planet and so on. They're not worried because they spend more time on private jets and they, burn more carbon-based fuels than an African farmer
my favorite
would
one's
do in a year.
Leonardo DiCaprio. I mean, you
Right.
should see the size of the yacht, and burning bunker fuel in those big oil engines. What a hypocrite. And the outgoing head of the climate change committee, Chris Stark, another case in point, telling everybody that they ought to be getting a heat pump. And then when he was asked, well, is your heat pump running well? He had to admit, oh, well, I haven't got a heat pump. I'm still using a gas boiler. But at the same time, he's saying there's nothing wrong with the net zero agenda apart from the name, because the name's become associated with all the campaigns against it.
Well, I mean, it used to be global cooling was what they talked about 50 years ago. Then it was global warming, and then it's climate change. Now it's net zero. They seem to keep changing the name all of the time.
Yeah, because none of it's popular. And during the time when the temperature was going down, and it did go down, especially the 60s through to the mid 70s, the temperature went down globally. And that was caused by a reduction in the amount of solar radiation reaching the surface. In other words, it was getting cloudier, and now it's getting less cloudy. And these things seem to happen on roughly 60-year cycles. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next decade or so, because it may well be, as you'll remember from the talk that I gave at your party conference, that in recent years the Arctic ice has really not been melting very much at all.
No.
It's in fact showing signs of maybe increasing again. And so this could well be linked to the same sort of processes that give us these roughly 60-year cycles, which are evident in the data going right back to the middle of the 1800s from the temperatures that were measured by people putting buckets off the side of ships and pulling up some seawater and putting a thermometer in and recording the temperature. So, it's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens next.
It does. I mean, I say to people, look, there has been an increase in global temperatures, but that's after the mini ice age, which was one of the coldest periods that we've had. And then before the mini ice age, there was the medieval warming period. But then you say that to people and they huff and puff, but they don't have an answer. They can't say anything back.
And you can keep going further back, can't you? As the Dark Ages in the 700s, that was a cold time. There was the Roman period, that was a very warm time. And so it goes back into the mists of time, and that seems to happen on roughly a 1,000-year cycle. And my little amateur research group has been looking at this for ages, and we've come to the conclusion it's actually the motion of the big planets around the solar system that are the root cause of these kind of oscillations in climate at various timescales, whether it's those 60-year timescales, or a time scale around 200 years called the De Vries cycle, or 1,000 years. And so on, and there's another one around 2,500 years, and so on. So natural variation hasn't really been accounted for, and until we do, then there's no way we could know what sort of effect humans were having on the climate anyway.
That's absolutely true. Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I hope that more people are going to see that carbon dioxide is nothing to be worried about, and certainly that we get people in the places where people make these balmy decisions kicked out, and we can get back to rebuilding our energy infrastructure. Anyway, look, Roger, thank you so much for joining me. It's really great to have you on the show to talk about this.